Good morning, everybody. My name is Phil Spencer. So I'm very excited to be here. I do want to just say that when I graduated uni with a theatre studies degree, it was made very clear to me that on the one hand, I probably wouldn't make a great deal of money in my life, but on the other, my working day would not begin before 10 a.m. generally. But here I am this morning. So I know it's early for everyone, but for a theatre person, this is an ungodly hour to be awake and talking in front of you. I'm saying that so that you'll forgive the fact that I may look down at these notes, but it's amazing what a free patisserie will do. Now, as you can probably tell from my thick English accent, I am in fact an Englishman. I've been living in Sydney for about 5 years, and for the majority of that time, I've been working in the independent arts sector. I've been working as a theatre maker, a programmer, and a creative producer, which is essentially a fancy way of saying I've written a lot more funding applications than I have plays in the last few years. Now, really, I just want to talk to you this morning about what I think about when I think about action in terms of my role. What it is that gets me out of bed in the morning, though not usually as early as this. I moved here from the UK, and I think in some ways it forced me to take action that I might not have otherwise taken. I arrived in Sydney, and for my sins, like a lot of people, I used to be an actor, not anymore, but I arrived here, and it was pretty much impossible to get in a show or get a show on. I turned up here with no immediate artistic community and an awful Australian accent, which has got better in time, although it's still a little bit racist when I do it. Then after a few months, I met my now boss, Leland Keane. And Leland is the artistic director of the company I now work for, and he's a director. And so I sat Leland down. Instead of asking Leland whether I could be in a show of his or pitching him an idea for a play, I simply pitched him an idea. And that is that I would run an event called Cut and Paste, which would be a bi-monthly scratch night that would bring together a collection of artists to try out a 10-minute idea in front of an audience. So I'd bring together theatre makers, comedians, musicians, storytellers. And the focus on the event would be trying a new idea out rather than sort of putting together a schmick, slick show like I'm doing right now. Now, I sweetened the deal by explaining to Leland that I would program the event and I'd also produce it. Now, the idea itself isn't new. It's something I had appropriated, we'll say, from the Battersea Arts Centre in London. Now, when I arrived in Sydney 5 years ago, there wasn't a theatre company who had anything like that, quite like that in their programme. Obviously, when it began, it was just a sort of shameless excuse for me to get my own work in front of an audience, but it very soon gathered its own momentum and took its own sort of focus. Cut and Paste is still going 4 years later, and it's seen over 100 artists on the bill. Now, some of these ideas that artists have tried out in front of audiences have died firmly on their arse, but other ideas have gone on to be developed into sort of main stage theatre shows, one even an award-winning show, and one toured nationally and internationally. Over the last 12 months, Cut and Paste, this project has been funded by the City of Sydney Cultural Grants, and it is now part of the annual programming agenda for Rock Surfers Theatre Company. Now, my boss, Leland, later told me that I was the first person in 5 years to sit him down and not pitch him a play or ask for an acting job, but to pitch him an idea that activated and engaged a group of artists who were already around me. Now, we've recently become the resident theatre company at the Bondi Pavilion Theatre, which is a beautiful 230-seat venue right there on Bondi Beach. And for the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we've been chucking the kitchen sink at it, which is a technical programming term that I'm happy to explain a bit more about later. Now, the Bondi Pav has a sort of rich cultural history, but over the last few years, it has, by all reports, remained a fairly vacuous and inactive theatre space. Neil Armfield, who's the ex-artistic director of Belvoir Theatre Company, is alleged to have said, and I can't quote him directly, but something along the lines that the Bondi Pavilion Theatre space will never work unless you can make it work in winter. And so I suppose one of my first real challenges working with Leland at Rock Surfers was to try and activate a seaside arts venue in the dead of winter. And as you can imagine, for that, you need a lot of action and a lot of activity. So myself and my colleague Zoe Norton-Lodge set about inviting a collection of artists and putting call-outs to local artists, and we created a fortnight festival. We programmed, much like Cut and Paste, we programmed comedy, storytelling and music events. We invited local food vendors, and we created a festival called Bondi Feast. It went very well. We had over 100 artists participate over the fortnight. We had almost 2,000 patrons through the door, and yeah, by all intents and purposes, it worked. It's happening again this year, although I don't know yet if it's going to work again. So in closing, I'd just like to say that I suppose I see my role as somebody who works as an arts programmer in Sydney, not as some sort of cultural gatekeeper or artistic visionary, I'm certainly not that, but simply as somebody who is striving to devise new and accessible methods of programming that promote risk, that support experimentation, that encourage and ultimately activate a community of artists who are already there to take action of their own. I do want to finish the set by saying that although this morning is about action, I was reminded of something my mum once said to me, and she said, "Phil, it's sometimes important to decide not to do something." And I'm reminded of that because as I was leaving my office yesterday afternoon, a colleague who shall remain nameless, though they know who they are, suggested maybe next year we think about programming Australia's Got Talent, the musical. And I had to remind myself that sometimes action is deciding not to do something.